little while back I was contacted by a customer to replicate his car. He sent me over the actual model that I needed to rebuild and repaint to look like his car, and a little while later I started disassembling it, removing all of the plastic parts and the parts that don't need to be repainted, and then of course stripping the paint. After I've removed all of the plastic parts from the body, I put it into a plastic bag and pour the paint stripper from Zero Paints in. This has a bit of a different color as it has been used a couple of times, and reusing it just mixes it with some of the leftover paint that you've stripped before, and that kind of gives it a weird looking color, but it still works perfectly fine. After I've left it in there for a bit, I just pour the remaining stripper back into the bottle for reuse later on another project. The body is then washed in some water with a brush, and then I can move on to a couple of the modifications. So the modifications that need to be done to this one are actually just on the roof in this case. The actual car has a sunroof and this one doesn't, so what I needed to do was scribe the lines in there. I firstly just laid down some masking tape, cut along it a couple of times with a knife, scribed them out to make them a bit deeper, and then also replicated the other lines for the remaining sections of that sunroof. Now of course I'm just going to cut the lines in there and paint this area black to look like the sunroof, as I personally am not capable of recreating an actual glass or plastic clear panel to fit in there perfectly and have the nice shape and also still look really good. So instead, painting it black looks really good, and the customer is really happy with this. All of the lines are now scribed. I needed to clean them up a bit with some sanding sponges, 400 grit, and while I was at it I just sanded the rest of the body as well with the same 400 grit, cleaned it up a little bit before primer, placed it on the Tamiya spray stand. Links to that are in the description down below, just for a lot of the other materials you see me use in the video, then moved on to applying the primer. As I'm replicating the actual car of the customer, it is of course always nice to have an actual color code and order the paint specifically for this build. Now sadly, the customer could not get the color code from his car, and I was not able to order the specific paint for it. Instead, we went with a base that started out as a close match, or at least we thought it would be a close match. Instead, it turned out not to be a close match instead, but it was a good ground to start from. So I added a bit of a darker blue from Subaru into it and started mixing and matching a bit, spraying a couple coats, adding a bit of the blue, adding a bit of the other blue, until we were happy with the match that it actually came out as. A few hours later, after I had let the body dry, I moved on to masking off the roof to paint that black section for the new sunroof piece. Now along the sunroof there were also a couple of other areas on the car that were custom and specific to his, and that were painted areas on the lower section and also the mirrors in a gunmetal light gray color. So those were carefully masked off and then sprayed individually, and then I could move on to clear coating it. After peeling off all of the masking tape, I mixed up some clear coat and started applying 2 light coats of clear until I was happy with the nice glossy sheen. Once the final coat of clear was applied, I let it sit and dry for about 2 to 3 days before moving on to additional detailing. Now on the front and back side there needed to be a bit of a black sheen on some of the parts, and I decided to test out the new lacquer paints from Tamiya. These are brushable and also usable for the airbrush. They are lacquer paints, so they are not acrylic or water based, of course, and therefore they do smell a bit more, but they do dry also really fast and have a super strong finish in the end, which does not scratch off all that easily. I really like it for the smaller detail parts. If you're going to go for some of the bigger parts and pieces, I find it to dry a bit too quick for the brush side of things, so I wouldn't recommend it for those. Instead, those smaller pieces that I'm using it for here are perfect. With the small details painted on, I could move to the final assembly using some Bob Smith Industries Super Gold Plus. With the final mirror now glued in place, this one is completed. Now I do have to note this was of course a custom mixed color, so it's not an exact match. This was done in collaboration with the customer. He agreed on the color, and he also sent me out a sample of another scale model with the same color, which I held next to it while painting it, and it was a really close match. As you can see in these pictures, it's not an identical match, but it's close enough, and the customer is really happy with it. And of course, different lighting, different shading is a different color on the photo. Nonetheless, the customer is happy and it's sent to him to enjoy.